And now let's join Maggie Linton on SiriusXM Urban View.
Well, folks, the past couple of years in particular have been very traumatic for Black mothers around the country. Joining us to talk about this Friday's Stop the War on Our Children Mothers March is nationally recognized human rights activist, theologian, historian, social critic, and educator Ruby Sales, founder of the Spirit House Project. And we are so glad to have you here.
Here, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, listen, it is wonderful to have you. We have to talk about your life, because you didn't just wake up yesterday and decide to become an activist. You have been on this journey for a long time.
Yes, I became a part of the Southern Freedom Civil Rights Movement when I was a student at Tuskegee Institute and went to work with SNCC. I'm a member of SNCC, ex-member of SNCC, in Lowndes County, Alabama, which was called Bloody Lowndes. There had been so many murders of African Americans in Lowndes County until you could look in a gully and see the bleached bones of African Americans who had been thrown in the gully. And Stokely Carmichael, before he became Kwame Ture, was a beloved organizer in Lowndes County, Alabama. It was in Lowndes County that I became a part of a community of organizers that included Julian Bond, Bob Mance, Gloria House, Mikasa Ricks. It was an incredible experience, and it was in Lowndes County that I began to understand the power of ordinary people to change the world. Change in the movement did not happen from the top down. It happened from the bottom up. And it was in Lowndes County that I began to really realize the sound of my own name, and it was Black.
As you mentioned, it starts from the bottom up.
Yes.
And another big Super Tuesday we have here all over the country, the power of the vote. And why aren't we doing it?
Well, I think that it's really important to understand that when we fought for the vote, we were really fighting for Black people to be able to participate in the direction and the well-being of democracy in a world that had rendered us unessential and invisible. So the right to vote is really a right that gives expression not only to the needs of African American people, but is also essential to making sure that democracy does not tilt further into becoming a fascist nation where only one voice is heard. And so it's really, I think that what has happened in the last years or so is that Black people have been hit with so many different assaults on our children, on the home, on the schools, public schooling, even on the church, shifting it away from liberation theology to prosperity theology. And so I think that in many ways we have lost some of our vigor. And I think that we have to really we can't develop a platform that does not deal with racial issues in a world where racism is at the center of our life in this country. So I think that part of why Black people don't find the urgent need to vote is that we can't find our lives represented in the platforms.
But the only way we can change that.
Barack Obama ran for president, that was an exciting moment because we saw some part of ourselves and our struggle reflected in his movement towards the presidency. So we have to challenge the Democratic Party to create a platform that represents the common needs of people of color in the 21st century, where leaders have decided that we are both unessential and disposable waste.
And even if we're in the Republican Party, we have to make a change.
Well, I think that we've got to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as soon as black people made the gains that we made in the Southern Freedom Movement, Democrats, who now are Republicans, Dixiecrats, left the Democratic Party because of LBJ and the Great Society and the Civil Rights Bill. And for 40 or more years, the Republicans have been fermenting a racist platform that began with Richard Nixon and was taken further with Ronald Reagan, and developing a colorblind language. Lee Atwater said, "We've reached a stage in American political drama that you can't say nigger anymore. So you have to use coded language like busing the American people. But hidden behind that, the working poor, the middle class, hidden behind that language is a coded message about whiteness." So I realize that there are Republicans in this country, but part of the responsibility of voting is to be intelligent about your vote and don't vote against your own survival and interests. And I suggest that people vote on issues and not candidates.
Yeah, very true. All right, let's talk about why you're really here today and where the idea for the Stop the War on Our Children's Mother's March came from.
Well, it's a Mother's March in the sense that we think that black women, all black women, whether we birthed a child or whether we're other mothers, have played an essential role in maintaining the rights and well-being of African American children all the way back to the early and late 19th centuries. And so we're trying to revitalize that base in our community, to be involved to stop the war on our children. And let me tell you why I say it's a war. In every aspect of the life of black children, they find themselves pushed against the wall through violent assaults in public schools, through resource officers, the fact that they are 3 times more likely to be victims of corporal punishment, to being victims of state-sanctioned murder on the streets of America. I began this journey in 2007 when I saw a little article in the newspaper about a 17-year-old African-American man named Billy Joe Johnson, youth, he wasn't a man, he was a child, in Lucedale, Mississippi. And the report said that he had committed suicide in the presence of a deputy sheriff on a lonely highway in Lucedale, Mississippi. I went down to investigate that because my movement work in SNCC, in the Civil Rights Movement, alerted me to the fact that something was foul.
Yeah.
And I went down to...
You could smell it from where you were.
I could smell it from where I was. He was 17 years old, came from a very poor family, but had 14 scholarships. And most of those were to Big Ten colleges because he was a great football player. And when I investigated it, I discovered that really he hadn't killed himself, that he and the deputy sheriff were dating the same young white girl, and that he had been shot by the deputy sheriff, made to lie in the street in the hot sun, dead for 9 hours. And they would not let his parents see his body as he lay dead in that hot Mississippi sun. And the only people whom they allowed to see his body was the coach and the superintendent of schools. They shipped his body to Jackson, Mississippi. His parents did not know where his body was for days. When they finally were told where his body was, they finally shipped the body back, and it was shrouded from the waist down, and a jaw was missing. That began this journey of mine to document state-sanctioned murders. And on this journey, I met Black women whose children had been murdered, unarmed children had been murdered by police. And I began to really see a phenomenon developing that I felt that the nation was not in touch with. And as I began to look at this, for example, Ariana Jones, 7-year-old Black girl in Detroit, Michigan, asleep in her grandmother's bed when a SWAT team invaded her house and blew her away without cause. 7 years old. I saw Celicia Johnson, although she wasn't killed, a 6-year-old kindergarten Black girl who threw a tantrum and was taken to jail in handcuffs without the knowledge of her parents. The criminalization and the militarization of public schools is a common feature in the war on Black children. So the more I began to understand my own self, because at first I had no really cognitive and political understanding of what we were up against. But the more mothers I met, the more it became very clear that our children were seen as enemy combatants, and that this government from 1991 to the present were giving police in public schools from Los Angeles to Ohio AK-47s and other massive weapons of destruction in a systemic militarization of public schools where 98% of Black students attend. The more I talked with the mothers, the more I was moved by their grief. And then I began to understand that when a child is murdered by the police, it not only brings grief to the family, it destabilizes the family. And they suffer severe trauma long after the death has happened and the lights are gone. So we're here today to call attention, to serve notice, to stop the war on our children, and to raise the level of national consciousness, to say that our children are not thugs. They're vital participants in democracy and important resources in a global world that is rapidly becoming colored.
We're going to take a quick break. When we return, more with Ruby Sales. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back.
Featuring guests that highlight everyday life. You are listening to The Maggie Linton Show on Sirius XM Urban View. Stories that inspire you. You are listening to The Maggie Linton Show on Sirius XM Urban View.
Well, welcome back. We continue with human rights activist, theologian, historian, social critic, and educator Ruby Sales, founder of the Spirit House Project. We're here talking about Friday, Stop the War on Our Children Mothers March that's going to be held here in Washington, D.C. All right, we're ready for particulars about the march. What do we need to do?
Okay, first of all, if you want to be a part of the delegation, which is limited, you need to show up 9:30 at Freedom Plaza, where we will gather to have a funeral walk. And we will be led by a hearse, and women representatives in the delegation will carry boxes with the scrolls of the dead, and we will deliver those scrolls to members of Congress who have played a vital role in accelerating the war on our children. And we will also call the name of the dead on the steps of the Capitol. We will we will walk down Pennsylvania Avenue in the funeral march.
And we should say that Freedom Plaza is between 13th and 14th on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Thank you.
Northwest.
Northwest, yes. Mm-hmm. And we will proceed down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. And from the Capitol, we will go to Church of the Reformation, which is a Lutheran church on 1st Street Northeast, where we will have public hearings, which we hope everyone will come. And we will offer testimonies that will show why we believe there's a war on our children. We will hear from mothers who have come from Florida, Ohio, New York, Illinois, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, who will tell us the stories of the murders of their children, some of them as young as 14 years old, like Andrew Joseph, whom the police turned out on Interstate 4, and he was hit by a white driver who never served a day in jail. So we will look at these, they will tell their stories, and we will issue a 5-point plan as a way forward. And this is just the first step, the first plank on a national movement to stop the war on our children, which is a door-to-door grassroots campaign, with women being at the base of that movement,
And you have obviously been getting this together for quite some time. This isn't something you woke up yesterday and said, well, let's do this. It's been something that's been ongoing and building because you've been doing your homework, haven't you?
Yes, we have been doing, for example, I'm getting ready, Spirit House Project, of which I'm the founder and the director. We have been working on a report that documents all state-sanctioned murders of African-American people since 2007. And we have a database of more than 2,500 names and still counting.
Each person that's killed, brother, son, uncle, nephew, grandchild, and we have to stop the murdering also within our own community. But you say just the sanctioned murders are overwhelming, and you pile the others on top of it, and we have to have it stopped.
The reason why we make the distinction, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. We are opposed to any killing. Mm-hmm. But the reason why we are deeply opposed to state-sanctioned murder, the individual who kills someone ends up in jail and gets punished. And because people kill each other, it doesn't mean that they forfeit their right to have equal protection under the law. And state-sanctioned murders legalizes the killing of African American people.
And how often
under the cover of the law?
And how often are they found not guilty? The ones
99% of the time. Yes. Rarely do you have a police who has served time. And one of the things that the Supreme Court has said is that the only thing a police needs to do is to say, I feared for my life. And they don't have to offer any objective criteria for why they feared for their lives. They just simply have to say it. And even if a suspect is fleeing with their backs turned to the police, the Supreme Court has legalized the right of police to shoot someone in their backs when they're fleeing.
I can remember years ago where it was the maiming of someone, but not the killing. But the killing has truly escalated.
it has truly escalated to a point that it has become, as Ida Wells Burnett said about lynching in the 1890s and the 1870s, it has become a national crime.
You have demands that are set up for this march too. Some of the things that you want. One of them, as you just said, a bill against state-sanctioned murders.
Yes.
Also, federal and local governments talking about their tax dollars.
Yes. We no longer will allow our tax dollars to be killed to destroy our children. We demand that our tax dollars be used to elevate their lives. The other thing that we don't want to go back in solving the privatization and the destruction of public schooling. We don't want to go back. We don't call for segregation. We realize that integration was a problem because it did not allow Black teachers to be a part of the school system. So we don't want integration either. We want democratization. So we call not segregation, not integration, but democratization, where teachers, administrators, and the curriculum represent the multi-ethnic nation of which we are all a part of.
And that's so very important. When you look at it, the way the public school system is deteriorating into charter schools, where people have to pay money to go to school instead of using, as you said, the tax dollars that are here that the state provides for, it is a crime. It is definitely a crime.
And so the young people have trauma in school, and then they come home in households around the country, and they have to drink leaded water. Now, not just in Flint, Michigan, in Selma, Alabama, in Jackson, Mississippi, in about 20 cities throughout the country that are predominantly Black, children are drinking leaded water. And then, with the privatization of water in this country, they live in households where, because their parents cannot afford to pay escalating water bills, they have to go to public places like the library to take a bath or to brush their teeth.
Before we went, or just after we went to break, you started talking about the traumatization of mothers, too. Talk about that as we close.
Yes. Well, what we've seen developing is severe trauma that mothers are going through based on the murder of their children. Some of these mothers are suicidal. Some of them are so depressed they can't get up in the morning to go to work, and therefore they've lost their jobs, and therefore the house is in foreclosure. They can't pay their bills. The other children began to act out in school. We just see that these murders have a profound impact on destabilizing families. And the residue of those murders are very troubling. And we have got to begin to deal with what that means for families, the trauma, the internalization of that pain, and the fact that there are no public institutions available to support these families. My small organization pays water bills, give people money to get court transcripts as they try to move forward. This is really an urgent time in our community, and we need organizations and people and churches and groups to step forward and provide the families with the support that they need in order to move forward and put the pieces back together in their own lives.
It's so very important. Folks, once again, we have with us Ruby Sales, founder of the Spirit House Project, which she was just talking about. Check their website, spiritHouseProject.org. spirithouseproject.org, where you will find more information about Friday's Stop the War on Our Children Mothers March. By the way, it starts at 9:30 a.m. at Freedom Plaza. That's between 13th and 14th Northwest here in Washington, D.C. And then it moves on to Congress and then we move to the Lutheran Church of the Reformation, and that's on East Capitol. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, truly, we look forward to having you back. By the way, folks, you can check the Spirit House Project also on Facebook and Twitter. And Twitter, she is The Real Ruby Sales, and it's just as it sounds, SALES. And on Facebook, you can also find out lots of information there. Stop the war on our children. Speak out. Go and support them. Thank you so much.
And vote.
Thank you. And vote. Tomorrow, it's Wealth Wednesday, and we'll spend the day getting you ready for financial success. Started a little bit today. Julie Marie McDonough, a.k.a. The Credit Lady, will cover how to raise your credit score. And former businessman and now Professor Kerry Siegel with his book, Why Didn't They Teach Me This in School? Many thanks to producer Adele Coleman and also to Tony Fowler. Don't forget, folks, vote. It's so important. It can change your life. Have a blessed rest of day. Until next time, seek peace and spread lots of love. I'm Maggie Linton.